You're listening to What's Up Digital Lending, the podcast that explores the exciting world of digital lending. We make a deep dive into the most important issues and talk to the leading minds of the ecosystem.
Welcome to the third season of What's Up Digital Lending. Folks, how wonderful that you remain loyal to this podcast. Thank you very much. My guest today in this episode number 21 is Clifford Tjok, Chief Operating Officer at Loancos. This is a backup servicer. My name is Konstantin Fabricius and I'm the host of this podcast. Today we are discussing a very relevant topic: the increasing number of shakeouts among non-bank digital lenders across European countries with a focus on retail investors. Only the latest case causing a stir is the insolvency of a regulated fintech lender from Germany in July, which was dragged down by activities in the grey capital market actually. Shortly before, another regulated entity, this time from Estonia, called out the closure of its business. What is striking about the various current difficulties in the market across Europe is that almost all of them are happening in the real estate sector. This turmoil is reason enough for us to talk today about what actually happens, or at least what actually should happen to investors' claims when a fintech lender struggles. Before we start, however, listen carefully to the following, please. The content of this podcast is expressly not to be considered investment advice, but is intended solely for your information. We do not assume any liability and will not share any profits. Okay, let's start talking. Welcome to the show, Clifford.
Yeah, Konstantin, many thanks for having me here.
So, how are you today?
I'm fine. Yeah, very good. It's not really the summer we had been expecting, but it's busy anyways.
Okay, it's busy. Okay. Yeah, let's jump into our topic that we're going to discuss today. Clifford, what exactly does it mean when a fintech lender goes bankrupt and is no longer available as the central point of contact between debtors and investors? How does this work in practice?
Yeah, many thanks for the question, Konstantin. First of all, I have to point out that neither Loancos nor myself can give any legal advice here. What I can provide here is definitely a view from someone with 30 years market experience. So in real life, in an insolvency in Germany, an insolvency administrator is put in charge by the local court. And local means the location where the physical location where the insolvent fintech lender had been operating. The role of the insolvency administrator is to secure everything, and I really mean everything, for the insolvency state of the company that has gone insolvent. So he will go after any money that is being owed by debtors of the fintech on one side. And on the other side, as far as the investors of the fintech is concerned, the question is always what type of capital the investors have provided to the fintech. The type of capital provided does actually determine the priority of the claim that the investor may have. So if the capital provided is senior secured debt, there is a very high chance that the claim is treated with priority, which could mean that the investor may get some or even all of the money invested back. German insolvency law in general favors senior creditors. But if the claim is considered equity, then the claim is treated without any priority, which means that the equity may get whatever is left after all senior and junior creditors have received some kind of repayment. In most cases, I am afraid I have to say, the equity is fully wiped out. So the immediate time after an insolvency is usually highly stressful. In the first 3 months, the insolvency is legally considered temporarily, as the insolvency administrator will try to continue the operation during that time, and especially try if an investor for the entire fintech can be found. For the first 3 months, the fintech's employees are entitled to insolvency money, which is equal to the net salary up to the earnings ceiling minus deductions.
Thank you very much for this input. Ideally, the management of the fintech lender will have considered this scenario in advance and included it in its risk strategy. This is at least what my expectation is. But what happens, Clifford, if this is not the case? This is likely to apply to quite a few players in the gray capital market, in particular in the gray capital market. So what's your take?
The big question is always whether the financing that the fintech and therefore its investors have provided, for example, to real estate project developments, is senior debt with a strong position in an insolvency of the project, or junior debt which has a weaker position, or whether it is equity which is likely to be wiped out in an insolvency of the project. Now, I'm actually going to tell you a big secret for investing and how to avoid losing money. So the question is always, you should look into the kind of structure you're investing into. So the fintech lender may have set up like a holding company to collect investment money and then basically pass that investment money on into like projects at like a project company level, operating company level. And then the question is, what kind of capital have you provided? If it's like debt, right? Looks fine, looks good, or secured debt. But if it's at the holding company level, and if it actually is passed down into the operating companies as equity, then typically you would already have a senior lender, for example, a bank that has like a senior position on the debt and has like a security over the collateral. So in fact, you are actually subordinated. So in that case, chances are very low to get any money back because the bank that has provided the senior loan is first in the ranking to get the money back. If, however, the fintech platform has like collected the money from you and is actually passing it through directly as a senior loan into the project company, you stand a very good chance to get money back here, right? So that's the big difference here. So the rule is very simple. Think how to get out before getting in.
Yeah.
So to answer that question, I would strongly recommend to look for professional advice, for example, from a specialized lawyer before investing any money. If the money provided is really senior secured, for example, by real estate property, then you stand a good chance to get some or even all your money back. If the money provided is equity, you have to know for yourself that there is the chance to lose your entire investment. But if you really feel that you want this investment, then you should make sure that you get the right return for such a risk. Even equity is like an investment that can be considered. For an equity investment, typical returns are between 12 to 20% per annum.
Yeah, we have a pretty weird situation in Germany, right? Because the European crowdfunding service provider regulation has been enforced already for a couple of years. But still, it is possible for platforms, for gray capital market platforms, by adjusting their business model to jump out of scope and to jump into the gray capital market by offering so-called qualified subordinated loans. And these are different from the requirements in the ECSPR allowing them to put investors at the very end of the chain in case of difficulties. And this brings me to my next question for you. What happens to investor claims in such cases? Who organizes the payment of interest and repayment, for example, in case of gray capital market stuff? Let's call it like this.
I think, thanks for the question. I think those qualified subordinated loans basically in case of an insolvency are forced into like a standstill. And in fact, you can actually, your hands are tied, so you cannot really do anything about your position, which makes, I think, the legal position very difficult to exercise any rights that you may have had before insolvency. I'll try to answer the question. Many years ago, I used to work in the restructuring and workout unit of a large bank. We had some distressed cases that had already arrived literally dead at the unit. In these cases, it is impossible to inject new life into such a case, which means effectively that the claim was wiped out entirely. In a fintech's insolvency, where you as a bank had provided a senior secured loan, the task is always on you as a bank to go after your own money. Even if you have a senior secured claim, you always need to tell the insolvency administrator that you have the right to step in early, as your claim has priority in an insolvency and will certainly not become part of the insolvency estate. So from what I've heard about the qualified subordinated loans, it appears that you don't have that right here in that case, and you're basically at the end of the queue, which is probably like comparable to equity, and you know what actually happens to the equity in an insolvency. I think that's where we are.
Yeah. Just for the audience, I think this is an important piece of information. Our association has always been opposed to the access to qualified subordinated loans for retail investors. And you can find this in the show notes. Our very last paper that we published in 2024, and we submitted it to the local legislator because we really believe that this is a product that is not really the appropriate product for retail investors, simply because they have obviously problems to understand what the consequences are in case of payment difficulties, or even worse, in case of insolvency. And there is an alternative, which is the European Crowdfunding Service Provider Regulation. And from our point of view, it would be the best possible option to bear the access to the grey capital market, and to limit it on scope of the European Crowdfunding Service Provider Regulation. Okay, but one additional question on this, what we have just been discussing, is could loan costs even help in such a chaotic situation? Is there anything that you could do for investors?
Absolutely. We have been brought into situations right before an insolvency occurred, or even after an insolvency happened. And our job would be to bring structure and order into a chaotic situation and to make sure that the senior lender will get the money back to the extent possible. We would see to that any payment flow into the company continues as expected, and that any payments to recipients outside the company are only made in close coordination with the insolvency administrator. Because obviously after insolvency, the insolvency administrator has the say in the company.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. Now let's move away from the sick case and take a look at the textbook case. How does all we have just discussed compare to a long-term, neatly implemented backup servicing plan for crisis situations?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Preparation is everything. So for a backup servicing arrangement to work as planned, it requires that the entire setup can successfully withstand an insolvency of the operating platform. I think that's key. To achieve that, we need to be able to take over all tasks of an operating platform that are required to get the money back for lenders and to run down the platform in line with the business model. So, and business model can vary from being like a consumer loan, fintech, or a residential solar or residential heat pump, or an auto car subscription business model. If, for example, an operating platform that provides solar panels and heat pumps to homeowners through very long-term lease agreements goes into insolvency, then the main thing is to continue any direct debit SEPA mandates long-term, and to continue any services of the operating platform that are vital for homeowners to continue making payments until the portfolio is fully run down.
Okay, great. And what exactly does such backup servicing require in terms of preparation in each individual step? Could you be perhaps a little bit more specific so that the audience is able to get a clearer picture of what the burden actually for the services is?
Yes. Yeah. So typically we have like 4 phases in backup servicing. The first phase is like a setup, and in the setup, we require everything is set up to do regular data downloads from the operating platform, so that we are in a position to take over the role of the fintech platform in an activation scenario, for example, in an insolvency of the platform. So that's the setup phase. And then there's the standby phase where you would typically do the data transfer, data download on a regular basis, once or twice a year. And that's part of the testing. And as the data download typically also includes private customer data, we are legally only entitled to receive encrypted data. So to ensure that data can be properly accessed, we would carry out testing between the fintech platform and us on a regular, like bilateral basis. What we also need is we require access to the bank accounts where customer payments are received through direct debit SEPA mandates. And then that's the second phase. That's still standby. And the third phase is the activation. We're getting activated usually by the trustee of the transaction. And then we act, that's the fourth phase, as replacement servicer. That's after activation. So essentially, we need to know and replicate any processes that are required vis-a-vis the operating platform's clients in order to ensure that those clients continue to make their payments over the remaining lifetime of their transaction.
Okay. And what exactly happens now in a crisis situation for which plans have been made? Some CEO calls and says, my house is on fire. And then what?
Yes. Now, that's pretty straightforward, Konstantin. As a backup servicer, the activation due to insolvency of the operating platform is typically triggered by the security trustee, as I already mentioned, and rather not by the CEO. So provided there is no further technical setup activity required, because we did that in the first place already when preparing for the event. So provided that there's no further technical setup required in the activation phase, we would confirm to be ready to act as a replacement servicer and then act as a replacement servicer. I mean, we had this before, actually. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? And we are the only servicer in Germany that got activated in a large-scale insolvency outside the Lehman Brothers insolvency, when the Vivacon platform, there was a 4 billion ground lease platform that had a couple of 100 million senior debt financing from banks, went into insolvency. And we were already the backup servicer on hot standby. And we got activated by the insolvency administrators. And that was basically like the textbook case where we basically stepped in and took over the role of the operating platform and continued the ground leases, and then to collect the monies from the lessees and also pay down the debt. Right. And that was that's basically our main credential in the German market, and pretty significant, obviously.
And Clifford, what solutions are available to secure cash flow? As far as I have understood, there are two options, but please correct me. The first option is that the cash flow remains with a fintech lender. The second one is loan costs takes over. Is it correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have to differ, obviously. In general, we always operate on behalf of the senior lender here, right? To get the senior lender the money back. So since the fintech lender's insolvency would trigger the activation of loan costs as a backup servicer, it would be our role to secure the cash flow, right? Which means that we obviously need access to the cash accounts, right? But that is all set up usually prior to activation, right? Part of the setup. And cash flow, there's two options actually to secure cash flow. The first is it can either be secured by continuing the direct debits from the customers, or by selling or disposing of any assets that secure the financing as collateral. And this is basically the way you get the money back.
Okay, thank you. I have never experienced a service provider jumping in practice, but I think for many in our audience, it is important to understand how this works in practice. So how does a practical cooperation between the employees of the fintech lender and the backup servicer work in a crisis? So what can you tell us about this?
Yes. I mean, in the first 3 months after the insolvency has been declared, right, the insolvency administrator temporarily, right, would try to keep everything going as is, right? And because the administrator would try to sell the entire platform to someone else. And then obviously salary is covered through the insolvency payments. That's all fine. I think after that, it becomes difficult because to maintain the platform as is simply that the likelihood is obviously getting less, right? And this is where we step in. So in an activation scenario following a crisis, right, we have had instances where we had also taken over the existing staff from the operating platform, because obviously it makes sense to involve those people that already do the processes, or they have been doing those processes, and to continue basically operating, when you continue operating the platform or certain processes, to use the same staff, to use the same people. And we've done this before.
Okay. And Clifford, how is communication with the investors handled?
Well, handling of investor communication will depend on what was agreed in the backup servicing contract. Typical items for investor communication could include some predefined investor reporting, which we would be doing. I think that's the course of things.
Okay. So let's summarize. What are the minimum requirements for a good emergency planning if you want to start now, if you want to start today?
Yes. I mean, thanks very much for the question. This is pretty straightforward. There's 3 items. So the minimum requirements for good backup servicing planning include the following 3 items. So number 1 is to have a backup servicer in place with experience from being activated. Number 1. And number 2 is you should prefer quality over a cheap solution. The cheap solution may be attractive because of the cost, right? In standby phase, people are typically concerned about the running costs in standby and setup, right? Because if if we are activated, then the fintech is insolvent, right? So they wouldn't care about activation and replacement servicing. But the cheap solution may bite back, as it could turn into a big disappointment when activation time comes. Unfortunately, and we know of instances where the backup servicer that was appointed and activated basically terminated the backup servicing contract just after he was going to get activated. Unfortunately, it would be far too late when people have to realize that the cheap solution does not work at all. So that's number 2. Number 3, if a backup servicer does not review in detail the items necessary for the activation phase, it is probably because he does not have a clue. And when we approach any backup servicing case and look at it to prepare as part of the emergency planning, we always start from the assumption that there is going to be an activation. So you are getting activated, and what do you need to do to manage that? And that's our approach. And these are the 3 points I would basically highlight as minimum requirements for good.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. Brilliant and very important information. And one last question, Clifford, for today's show. And perhaps you can bring this straight to the point as well. How does a fintech lender benefit from dealing with backup servicing at an early stage? I am posing you this question because there is so much disaster in the gray capital market. So how would a fintech lender benefit from it?
I mean, that's the heart of the entire matter here, right, of our discussion, Konstantin. So by having solid insolvency-proof backup servicing arrangements in place, that will dramatically improve a fintech lender's bankability for senior lenders and to get money, as it would demonstrate significant forward thinking around an insurance-type approach on the part of the fintech lender. So that would be seen very favorably, both from the lenders and maybe also from the capital market or the rating agencies, whichever you are going to.
Okay. Thank you very much, Clifford. We have come to the end of the show.
Yeah, many thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, as always, Konstantin, to share some views here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening as well. What have we learned today? Fintech lenders need to protect their interests and safeguard their customers. A reliable standby service provider builds trust and mitigates damage in the event of a fintech lender's default or insolvency. A very important message in these times. Okay, please make sure you subscribe to our podcast and save the date already today. The third Digital Lending Summit is going to take place in Frankfurt on 1st of October. More information in the show notes. Thank you for listening again. Stay safe and sound and see you soon.